Hello, everyone. She always beats me, that voice. We are delighted at the Merowitz Center to be able to welcome back Dr. Diane Everman. And those of you who've been on her previous programs will know that you're in for another amazing treat. Dr. Everman is currently the archivist for the Holocaust Museum, as well as the St. Louis Jewish Community Archives. She earned her BA and her MA in history from Oklahoma State University and her PhD in history from the University of Maryland in College Park. And she has served as the archivist for several projects, including the Richard Gephardt Congressional Papers at the Missouri Historical Society, and has established archives for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and the Taylor Family Enterprise Holdings, Inc. Corporate Archives, which is a position that she still holds. Dr. Everman also does classical archaeology. She's currently working on projects in Israel and Pompeii. When I say currently, as soon as COVID will allow her, she'll be back doing those things. We are delighted to welcome you back, Diane, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to, Judith, do you want me to go ahead and share screen now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yep. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see and everybody hear? Yeah. Okay. All right. So good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to talk about one of the treasures that we have, not only in the archives, but in the St. Louis Jewish community. And that entity this morning is Will Levy, an architect who was probably one of the most prolific architects for the first half of the 20th century here in St. Louis, but one that you probably never heard about. About, probably 5 years ago now, we stumbled across a few items about Will Levy, and then someone offered me a collection of Will Levy's architectural drawings that they rescued from a building downtown St. Louis. And I immediately said yes. So we have hundreds of Will's drawings, architectural drawings in the collection, representing about 200 structures in the St. Louis and Western Illinois area, and a few other scattered places. So I'm just going to give you a taste of things this morning to give you a sampling of his type of architecture that he produced here in St. Louis. So Will, as you can see here, was born in 1866 in New Orleans. Both of his parents were German. His sister Sadie was born in Pine Bluff. So you can see that the family was sort of moving around for a while before they actually came to St. Louis, and came when Will was a relatively young man. And then you can see that he began to study architecture. He worked for an architectural firm here for a brief amount of time. And then, as was very common in the 19th century, he just decided he would open his own practice. In 1895, he went on that 4-month tour of Europe. And I bring that up because it had a very important impact on his architecture and his style. And I believe you'll see that in some of the images that I'm getting ready to show. I just want to mention that Will was had about 6 decades of architectural work here in St. Louis, and he did it almost up to the day that he died. He did all kinds of things. He did residences, he did businesses, he did mausolea, he did all kinds of things, including having a very strong tie to baseball. And I will get to that at the end. So here we go. So the first thing I want to show you are some of the residences that Will was associated, that he either designed or he renovated or he made additions to. In this regard, Will was also very prolific. People would call him in to do things like if they wanted a new ornate fence, or if they wanted a new stable, and then later on a garage. And he designed those too. We don't usually think of those kind of structures as being designed by an architect, but certainly in the late 19th century and early 20th century, that was their domain. And this, by the way, is one of Will's homes that he designed. He was particularly well known for working in the Central West End and various streets along there. And so I'm just going to give you a sort of sampling of things. This is one of the very first buildings that Will was associated with. It's, if you can read an architectural plan, it's not a very ornate structure, basically a two-story structure with an attic space. This is on Cabinet Place, the burned residence, and this is in 1892. So this is very early on. And this is when he was still learning to be a draftsman and learning about the architectural practice. And I show you this not only because it's one of the earliest ones that he did, but it also has some very interesting things in it. One, you can see there's an indoor bathroom, which is very cool. But you can see that the architect has even specified, and this is with Grable and Weber, the type of flooring that was used. There's some information about built-ins and things like that, but keep that in mind as we go along, because will take that and just become a master at interior design as well as the exterior look of the building. Also, I want to draw your attention, and I don't know, can you see my mouse? Can you see that? No? Yeah, okay. In this area down here, you can see it says Will's room. This is actually where he lived at that time. So not only did he help design this building and did the blueprint for it, but this is his little nook right up here in the attic. You can see there's a servant's quarters back here. This is all unfinished in the middle. And then this is where Will stayed. He often over the years would stay in a place either in or near the building that he was working on, especially if it was a big structure. So this one is the residence that he designed for Rabbi Samuel Sale. You can see this one's on, it says Westminster Place, west of King's Highway. It gives it, we actually know the address of this building. It's 5115 Westminster Place. And he did this also very early. So this is one of those buildings that he did right after, you know, a couple of years after he had his sojourn to Europe. And you can see the influence of European architecture on this drawing in so many ways. The roof line, for one, the lovely arched windows, those will keep appearing over and over again in Will's drawings. Some incredible stonework in the front entryway over here. This particular pattern, Will liked to repeat. This was something that really drew his attention. And you can see that it's, this is a bad drawing because it's one of those sort of a waxy paper, so it doesn't image well, but you get the idea of this is a very large structure. It's very impressive. The date of this is also interesting because this is the same year that Rabbi Samuel Sale became the rabbi for Sher Emeth. So it's one of the very early ones that he did. It's sort of this incredible structure, and it's associated with the Jewish community in a lot of different ways. When I first started looking at all of the drawings, it seemed like in Will's collection, it seemed like most of them were associated with members of the Jewish community. And then I started running into things like this. James P. O'Neill is obviously was not a member of the St. Louis Jewish community, But that just shows the breadth of Will's appeal for various people in the early 20th century, especially because he was a very good architect. And again, I want to just point out on this structure is that not only this was sort of the current impressive architecture for St. Louis, but you can again see that European influence in this structure. You see this broken pediment over the front door. You've got the 4 columns and antis. You've got this incredible plaster work here on the frieze and above the dual windows, above the doorway. Again, that heavy stone line. So you can see this really, really detailed work. And this is early on. As we go forward, you'll see a lot more detail that Will was involved with and that he liked to incorporate in his buildings. And I will say that when you start driving around after you see this, and you see so many of Will's drawings, I think you'll start going, I bet that's a Will Levy building. I bet that's a Will Levy building. And you're probably going to be right. So this masterpiece is number 9 on Hortense Place. And it was the home of Jacob Goldman. Jake Goldman was a Civil War soldier, a Confederate, who came to St. Louis after the war, and he made his money in the cotton business. He became associated with the lesser Goldman Cotton Company. We'll get to that later on too. And had a big building downtown. Anyway, the cotton business was very good for him. And in the late 19th century, right around the turn of the 20th century, he purchased the area that became Hortense Place. It was a pasture land, and he decided he was going to create this amazing street for people to build great houses, and anybody was going to be able to live on it. There weren't going to be any restrictions about, what religion you were or anything like that. I'm sure that there was a race restriction, but anyway, this house was the only one on this block designed by Will Levy. And Jake Goldman asked him specifically to do this building, and he referred to it as the castle. And you could see sort of why. The building on the image on the left obviously is right after construction, and the one on the right is a relatively recent photo that I took. By the way, Hortense Place was named after Jake Goldman's daughter, who died in 1896, and that's why it's called Hortense Place, which seems sort of an odd name for us now, but that's the way it was. Jake Goldman also asked Will Levy to design the gates for Hortense Place. So if you go over there and you see these incredibly ornate gates, those are also Will's design. But this castle is just incredible. You can see, again, that European design, that influence on it. You get the turret, you get this heavy stonework on it. This is actually Carthage stone that was used for this building. Goldman loved these red tile shingles on the roof because he thought that it tied it into the new Union Station downtown. So Theodore Link's design down there used these kind of tiles. It's also very European. It's very fitting with all of this. And so this was part of the castle image of this. And this building is lovely. If you go down Hortense Place, you will see it. It's on your right-hand side if you're going west. It's a beautiful building. Now, I mentioned that Will did all kinds of things. He did gates and stables and things like that, but probably the most unusual house that he designed. Whoops, I'm sorry. I've put a slide in here that I forgot. This is the interior of the Jake Goldman house on Hortense. And I threw this in to show you how that, if you remember that very first building, and it was poplar floors, and there was only a few things. This is sort of Will Levy coming into his own, and I hope you can see it, some of the detail in here. So for example, the loggia and the vestibule are both mosaics. The parlor is bird's eye maple on the flooring. You can see that other places has some white oak, but you can see that there's 2 bathrooms on this first floor. You can start seeing that there are, up here, there's design for interior built-ins, and that became a hallmark of Will Levy's architecture also. I actually ran across a few photos at the Missouri History Museum in their collection, and they had an address, but they didn't know what it was, and it was the interior of another one of Will Levy's buildings. And it's just amazing, all of this incredible woodwork and everything, and it was all designed by Will Levy. So let me go back to what I was talking about a minute ago with the idea of an unusual building. And that's this. This is a doghouse that Will Levy designed for Morton May's dogs, I should say. When I first saw this, I thought, what? And then I realized, well, he had designed other things for Morton May. He was involved, this is from 27. He had helped design a house for Morton May. He had done for the other members of the May family. He had helped with businesses for them. So why not the doghouse also? This is a pretty cool doghouse. And if you can afford to have an architect do your doghouse, that's pretty amazing. You can see that it actually has 3 sections, interior sections, and the partitions are wired partitions, but they're made so that they're removable, so that you can have a larger space for the dog if you wish. It's about 10.5 feet long and 4.5 feet wide. You can see it even has a little, the doors on the front look like real house doors. It's got a shingled pitched roof. It even has this very interesting concrete open block area down here, this hollow tile, which would help for the environmental conditions, the heating, the cooling, if you will. And it's got footers. This is a doghouse, for heaven's sakes, but it's just fantastic. It's amazing what you can do with money, I guess. So one of the other really heavily Jewish connection architectural items that Will Levy did were various institutions for the Jewish community. He did others for the non-Jewish community, but a lot of the institutions that we know of from that turn of the 20th century and the early 20th century up, say, through the 20s, a lot of them were designed by Will Levy, including this one. This happens to be the Jewish hospital that was on Del Mar. Before this was 1902. There were some additions to it up through 1905. But before this, even in the late 1890s, he had done the home for the aged and infirm Israelites. Later on, he would do the convalescent home for Miriam Lodge. He would do various other buildings, and I'll show you a few of those. One of the interesting things about this building is that you'll notice that this sort of a structure, although not this pronounced, with the center structure and the 2 wings with a recessed connection in the back. It seems to be very common. When I did historic preservation survey eons ago, this was very common for this time period, but not on this scale. And you can see this is a very early picture from the completion of this main building. And then here you see Will's drawings for both the an exterior and an addition onto that original one, and then the lot plan. So if you've never experienced having something built by an architect, I have not. I've just seen a lot of their drawings. At least in this period, the architect was involved with everything, right? The lot plan, the plumbing, the fence line, everything. And so you can see from the lot plan on the right that you've got this sweeping drive that comes up here. This is that main building that you saw in the other image. And then the wings, the two main wings. So a male ward on the left and a female ward on the right. You get the children's building back here. And again, there's a connection here. The only one, should say that the only two that do not have a direct physical association are these two back here, which this is the isolation ward. And obviously, if you're going to have an isolation ward, you want to have it isolated. And then the boiler room back here. And that was because they didn't, if there was ever a problem, an explosion, a fire or something like that, it would not sweep through the rest of the hospital. So going back to the facade, you can see this same sort of thing. Again, once you start seeing it, you'll go, oh, look, that's a Will Levy building. You get this same sort of stonework, this same sort of patterning on the front. You get the really nice arched windows. This one has a cupola on the top of it. So, you know, or actually a couple of them. So you start seeing these things and you start going, oh, yeah, Will Levy, Will Levy. For the Jewish hospital, I will say that he did make a proposal to do the Jewish hospital that is on King's Highway. He did not get that contract, by the way. This is the Jewish Orphans Home. And if you're not familiar with this, this was a series of structures on Oakland, just east of Skinker. So that it basically on the south side of Oakland, so that you would look across and you would see the Kennedy Forest and Forest Park and all of that. The fundraising, obviously, you can see from the poster on the right, excuse me, on the left, is got that really cute little boy on it from 1926. And the building was actually 26 and then was design 26 or fundraising in 26, design in 27, building, and then dedicated in 28. So you can see this is one of the structures that was there. He did 4 structures for this Jewish orphans home. And it's a very cottage type of look. And again, that European influence, this happens to have sort of a half timbered approach to especially the front, this pediment here and the projection on the front. So again, that nice European influence is also a little different from some of the ones that Will had done. And you can see also he's got the key down at the bottom with the kind of materials that he wanted: concrete, brick, and cut stone. So Will worked a lot with not only the living, but also to help out people in their remembrance after they've died. And he built, I don't know how many mausolea at Mount Sinai, New Mount Sinai, as well as this a cottage, a keeper's cottage. He did various things, including this chapel and receiving vault. Right after we got these collections, I was actually on a tour with Esley Hamilton and others of Mount Sinai, and we were allowed into this building, and it was in very, very bad shape. And so we were talking about it, and they wanted to renovate the building. They wanted to stabilize it, and they wanted to know more about it. And I said, well, you know, we've got the drawings for this building. So we gave them copies of it so that they would be able to have all of the details that Will incorporated into the building. As I said, he did a lot of mausolea for Mount Sinai. He did the Julius Lesser monument here on the upper left. He did one for Emanuel Meyer. He did the Moses Schoenberg one that's here on the right. Leon Harrison, Julia Singer Bray, Morton Mays. He even did his sister, Sadie Levy Mahler, and her husband, Jacob Mahler. And Will Levy's also buried here, not in one of these grandiose entities, but he has a very simple stone, and it's at the foot of the plot for Sadie and Jacob Mahler, which is kind of surprising. That you would think that there would be a little more of a flashy monument for him. And you can see on the lesser monument up here, it's very much like an ancient temple. You've got columns and antis. You've got the cenotaph more or less in the center of it. It's very grandiose. I think this one was 1904 on this one. And then down here, you get sort of a change in style down here. So this is about 15, 20 years later, the Schoenberg Monument. And you can see it's a little more solid and heavy. And in the 1920s, Will started getting into this sort of really grounded architectural look, even more so than he had been before. And this is an example of that, even though it's a mausolea. And I would hope that most of you recognize this building. This is the Union Avenue Y, the YMHA, and an incredible building. And it was built to have all the bells and whistles that at the time the Jewish community would want and need. And it still serves that purpose and underwent a renovation. I don't know, it's been what, 15 years ago or so now, and it's still used as a community center. But this is one of Will's buildings. And I think if he were around today, he would say that this was probably one of his pride and joys, because he got to do so many things, not only on the exterior, but mostly on the interior of this building. Here you see it shortly after it was constructed on the left. I love this picture because I love the cars and the lines, the rail lines in the road. And on the right, you can see one of the drawings that Will did for the exterior of the building. And when you look at the building on the left, especially in the black and white photo, it looks kind of, yeah, basic. But when you look at the drawing and then you look back at it, then you realize how intricate the facade of this building truly is. The unique use of the stone, the way that the columns are created, the use of brick and stone, some really interesting plaster work. And this is one of the first buildings that Will Levy worked with the Winkle Terracotta Company to do ornate plaster on the front of the building. And he would keep up the relationship with Winkle Terracotta throughout the rest of his career. And I'll show you a couple of those, some really amazing buildings that he used them with. But you can see that he, as the architect, is the one who proposed the schema for the facade of the building, which is really, really cool. And if you were ever one of those people who had the pleasure of going to the Y here, it was state of the art at the time. It had a movie room. It had an area up here on the top where you could have dances. We've got some great photos of that in the collections. There were classrooms, there was an auditorium, there was a gymnasium. It was sort of take the J and the other buildings and sort of smush it all into this one structure, and you've got just an incredible array of items inside of the building. Will also did the Jewish Sanatorium. It started out as the home for chronic invalids, which sounds not like a very good name, and then they changed their name to the Jewish Sanatorium. And just like with the Jewish orphans home that I showed you before, in the late 19th and the early 20th century, the St. Louis Jewish community would send individuals elsewhere for care, as in terms of the orphanage, they would send them to Cleveland for the sanatorium, and this was specifically built for those who were suffering from tuberculosis. They would send them to Denver, and they realized that that was not really a viable thing to do. And so the community decided to build this home for chronic invalids, or the sanatorium, and Will got the contract of it. This was out on Fifi Road, if you're familiar with that area. Will did not only this main building, but a pump house, a summer house, a cottage, a chapel, and various things. And this is one of those buildings that you say, oh, wow, you know, to me, it almost looks like it came from Virginia. You know, it has the stately Ionic columns in the front. It has a large pediment with really impressive heavy dentils that are coming down off of that. And then you get this great coining here along the side of the building. And it looks like this very stately American building. And this is 1914 here in St. Louis. This is a drawing he did for UH, for United Hebrew Congregation. Let me think, this is on Delmar between Union and Clara. And I show you this because it looks like an arena to me. It has that sort of almost sat-on dome on the top of it. It has this enormous bell tower on one side. It looks like you would walk in there and you'd play basketball, or there'd be something else going on there. And this was his design for it. And you can see glimmers of other buildings, like this entryway right here to get in with the 3 doors and the way you come up the steps. That's very evocative of other buildings that exist, especially synagogues in St. Louis. He did this 1922, I believe is the date on this. The proposed budget of this was $300,000. And if you can imagine today, that is not even possible. They wouldn't even be able to do the front entryway for $300,000. And the same year he did this drawing, he also did a drawing for an addition on Sher Zedek at Page and West End. So he was very much involved with the Jewish community as a whole around that time. So let's switch gears a little and talk about some of the businesses that Will was designed structures for. And I will say that these run the gamut. Large, small, downtown St. Louis, Western Illinois, warehouses, parking garages. He did one hotel. And he also was the architect of the Westwood Country Club, which is what you see here. He did a lot of buildings for Westwood over probably a decade or so, including a pool and various other things. This is the Westwood Country Club, though, that was at Glendale Station. So if you go to Westwood Country Club now, this is not the one, but he did sort of on the one end country club, and then on the other end he did this building. So if you drive down Washington in Avenue, downtown St. Louis, this is about I guess around 13th, and it's on the north side of the street. and you think, this is an architect designed building? It really doesn't look like that. And it has suffered somewhat over the years. But Will did design this building. And if you took off all of this horrible, horrible concrete plaster facing on this and actually saw the building, you would say it's a much nicer building than what it looks like here. This was actually built, as you can see, because it's got this one pediment, as one building, but it was always designed to be split, smack dab down the middle of it. It's a very long lot, but a narrow lot. And it was always built to have two businesses in it. And when Will built it, he built it specifically for the Door Shoe Company and Broida Brothers dry goods. So I believe that, let me see my notes here. It looks like this side where it says Washington Avenue Post was where the shoe company was. And on this side over here where the bar is, the sidebar, I think this has changed its name, but I don't know, was where Broida Brothers was. And Broida Brothers had been, both of these companies had been elsewhere downtown, and they decided that they wanted to change locations. And so Will designed this. And it's a mirror image building. And if you didn't have this Washington Avenue Post sign up here, you would see there's this lovely window array across the front to bring in as much light as possible into this very narrow building. It also had skylights, which have also been covered up, and I'm not quite sure why. But it's a really interesting design, and it's not something that you would normally think of was designed by an architect, but it certainly was, and by Will Levy. This building always brings a smile to my face, even though I don't think it's one of his, the exterior is not the most appealing building. It's very heavy. This is the Mahler Ballroom, and this is on in the Central West End on Washington. And Jacob Mahler, the gentleman down on the lower left, was Will Levy's brother-in-law. So married to Sadie, and Jacob Mahler was the dance instructor and choreographer extraordinaire in St. Louis for decades. His father had been a dance instructor and a choreographer, as was his brother. And interestingly, over the years, Will Levy had done many buildings for Mahler. There's one that he did for him close to the Fox. There was a couple of others, and then this one, and this is the one which most people know about or associate with. Probably 10 years ago or so, the then owner of Mahler's Ballroom asked me to do some research on the building. And that's when I first encountered Will Levy, was that he was the designer of this. But the website for the Mahler's Ballroom always said it was Theodore Link was the architect, because they wanted it to be with a well-known architect. And I kept saying, no, it's really, it's Will Levy, and he is a well-known. You just might not know about him, but it's really a great thing that it's by Will Levy. And they really hesitated. But if you go on their website now, it does say that it was, finally, it says that Will Levy was the architect. You can see that there's all sorts of design here that's sort of covered up by this gray paint job. But there was another wing off of one side, which doesn't exist anymore on the west side. And there is some intricacy in the entryway. It's just a very heavy building. The inside, though, is where Will really strutted his stuff. He's the one who designed the rooms for where the kids put their shoes. He's the one who designed the ballroom floor. He's the one who designed the walkway around the the dance floor. And if you've ever gone in there or had the privilege of either taking dance lessons there or having a wedding there, you know how impressive the interior is. On his drawings, he even, for the dance floor, even was detailed on how that floor was supposed to be suspended and constructed so that it gave way just enough for when people danced, that it did not slow them down or it didn't make them feel heavy on the floor. So the outside might not be as impressive as the inside, but it's a great building. And I just want to show you, this is a picture that is of an earlier incarnation of Mahler's Ballroom with students who are being taught by Jacob Mahler. As I said, he was well known for being a dance instructor for a long, long time. One of his most famous dance students was Vincent Price. This is the Renskopf building, originally home and business, that Will Levy did. And I know I'm running late, so I'm going to sort of pick up this pace here. Again, you can see this incredible terracotta work on the front. The building today looks very much like the drawing did, with the exception of the front, I guess, protection above there, the porch rail, I guess. This is the Ferguson McKinney Cotton Company that was originally the lesser Goldman. Remember Jake Goldman? This was his building. This is at 12th in Washington. This was actually built by another architect or another company, and Will Levy coordinated with Eames and Young, which you might recognize their name, a well-known architectural firm, to do the renovation of the exterior as well as install elevators, fireproof stairways, and various things, as well as to redo the front. As you can see, this really not very nice metal thing that was added in the late 20th century was not part of the Levy, Eames and Young design. My favorite building that Will Levy did, this is the Dinks Parish Laundry. And this is probably the best use of the Winkle Terracotta Company in Will Levy's catalog of buildings. And this exists along Olive. If you're familiar with the area around St. Louis University, this is right there. Just to the left of the picture on the bottom is Pappy's Barbecue. So if you know where Pappy's is, you know where this building is. It had, Will had a very long relationship with Dinks Parish, probably about 20 or so years, adding to, designing, and then doing the facade of this building, which, by the way, if you don't know, has at least one spring in the basement, which is why it made it the perfect place for a laundry. Very quickly, the Lowenbaum manufacturing building here, this is at 23rd and Locust. Again, not an overly impressive building, but, you know, not boring. But I show you the drawing on the right, which is the first floor plan. And I know that on mine, if I take off everybody's picture, you can see on the right that Will not only laid out where the pressers were and the tables and the stock bin, but the sample room. And he also lays out exactly whose desk was where. You can see Florence's desk, you can see Rose's desk, you can see all of these people there. This is a condo, if I remember correctly now. All right, finally, baseball. So very early on, a gentleman who was a Pierce Arrow agent here in St. Louis contacted Will Levy and asked him to help build a new building for a showroom. And that man was Sam Bredin. And if you're a Cardinal baseball fan, that name might sound familiar, because while you might not know that he was a Pierce Arrow agent or salesman, you might know that he was the president of the St. Louis Cardinals. He worked very closely with Branch Rickey. He was associated with Sportsman's Park, but this is before that life started. But this building, as well as one that was just before this one in terms of time, was what got this relationship between Will Levy and baseball started. Because once he started working on these kind of business buildings, it went also to residences for Britain and both here and in Michigan and various other places, as well as with Cardinal Baseball. So this building is at Washington and Euclid. It's a restaurant, or at least it used to be when I was last over there. And again, you can see this has a more of a Spanish feel to it. Lots of very interesting architecture. If you take time to go down Washington to look at that building as it goes all the way back over here, because this is this part of this building. So it's more than this curved front. Excuse me. Baseball. This happens to be in a softball association. This is one that Will did here, but I'm going to go very quickly through baseball. Will was around when Sportsman's Park was at its height. He is the one who designed the lighting for Sportsman's Park. And I know that when there used to be a person who was with the Sporting News who contacted me and said, I understand you have a drawing of Will Levy's lighting, because they didn't know who had done the lighting for Sportsman's Park. The sad thing is that this park had already been designed. And so when Will did the lighting, he had to actually eliminate some seats in order to put the lighting in. He did the scoreboard. And then last but not least, excuse me, Sam Breton asked him to design a new Cardinal field. This was in 1944. And you can see this is at Grand and Chateau. It was never built. This looks very much like Busch Stadium in some ways. If you notice the arches down here, oops, the arches, the way it sort of general layout. It was never built because of the war and because Sam Breton was very ill at the time. So that sort of wraps it up. He also did a lot of logos, other fields, both Cardinal, for the Cardinals and the AAA, AA affiliates, as well as for the Detroit Tigers, of all things. So everything from Florida to New York, Pennsylvania, all over the place. So that's that. Do we want to do questions, Judith?
Sure. If
I have a
anyone has,
question.
yes, Linda, go ahead.
First of all, I have to say that was absolutely wonderful. I am so glad I got to see this program. As an interior designer, it was incredible to see and hear what he did, but it also answered some of the questions about how difficult it had been for interior designers who were not architects to deal with the fact of the pushback from architects who wanted to do the whole project and didn't want us to have anything to do with anything because they felt they were more qualified or because they already had the market. And so it's been a long, we have evolved greatly since those days.
And I think that the architects at the time thought it was their domain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, you know, it has evolved greatly and we do get along with architects. But I want to ask a question about the United Hebrew, one that looked like an arena, which I agree with you. I thought that was what it was. Did they ever build that? I didn't
Not to my
think
knowledge.
so, because the dome on Skinker is the one that I know of, and the front doors. So did he design the one on Skinker?
No, he did. To my understanding, that was a competition, and he did submit something. I don't have that drawing, But my understanding is that he did submit a drawing for possible acceptance, and it did not go forth. No.
Interesting, because the entryway was very similar.
Yes, very much.
And the dome and everything, there was a lot of elements that were
Yeah.
very similar to his.
And I've always wondered if that wasn't in somewhat the idea that that was what UH had said. We wanted to have a dome. We wanted to have, certain elements, and that's what they did. It would have been interesting to compare all of the entries
Mhm.
for that, in that competition for the UH building that we all know on Skinker, that's the History Museum's
Right.
research library, to see if they all do have those similar elements in them.
Right. Well, when we built out on Conway, the dome had to be. So we still have some remnants of the feel of the building before.
And that incredible, at least in the one on Skinker, incredible plaster work.
Oh,
Just
amazing.
phenomenal.
Oh, thank
And
you
great
again. It was
acoustics.
outstanding.
Do we have more questions? You can type. Oh, yes, Harvey, unmute yourself. There.
Did Will Levy operate as part of a firm, or was his practice solo with staff?
It was solo. Yeah. He never had a, there was one gentleman, it was actually, the gentleman who gave us the drawings was Ed Delata. And Ed's, if I remember right, his father and his uncle had worked at some point as draftsmen for Will Levy, but Will was primarily a one-man band with maybe somebody helping with the draftsmanship for the buildings. But if you can imagine, we have more than 200 structures in ours. I know that there were more because running research and checking for permits and things like that, he did an awful lot more than that. So he was constantly busy, obviously, for 6 decades. The man did it. He only stopped because of declining health. He was in his 90s, I think, when he did his last building.
Diane, can you tell us a little bit about his personal life?
Yeah, I can tell you a few things. He was part of the problem is he's a very solitary individual. He never married, which is a shame. I understand from various and sundry things from the family and others that he had a woman companion later in life when he was in his 70s and 80s and until he died. He also shunned photographs. The image that I showed at the very first is one of the few images of him that exists. He would often, in a crowd, if it was like the opening of something or the groundbreaking of something, and he was in the image, he would often stand at the very back of the groups, and you'd have to sort of look for him. And my understanding from the family, this was from Sadie's descendants, was that he had, I guess you would call it a hair lip, and was very self-conscious of that, and therefore did not like to have photographs taken. So it's a rare thing. If you find any, please let me know. But he didn't like to be photographed, and he didn't reveal much about his private life. And it's very sad that his monument is not really a monument at all at Mount Sinai. It's basically a flat stone, and just associated with his sister and brother-in-law, the Mahlers. I'm on a crusade to do more for Will Levy throughout St. Louis. But that's about all I know about him. We do have his notebooks that he had with him in Europe, in the 1890s. I have his drafting kit, his various and sundry small items, and he really liked to keep clippings of things that struck his fancy from publications or newspapers or things like that, for ideas that he would sometimes incorporate into buildings. So we have, I don't know, a foot or more of material of those things that he collected over his lifetime, sort of his inspiration files, if you will.
Do we have more questions? People can unmute and ask or chat. Thank you, Diane. That was just so informational and very interesting. Stephen,
Good,
do
and I
we-
hope that as you go around town or as you look at things, you know, start looking for Will. He'll pop up in the most unexpected places. As I said, even in Jefferson and Lincoln County, there's some in East St. Louis, there's some in other places in Western Illinois, certainly downtown, the Central West End, you know, go out and take a walk and go, I bet that's a Will Levy building, and you're probably going to be right.
Diane, thank you so much for this presentation. It
My
seems
pleasure.
It
My
seems
pleasure.
to me if you were to give a talk on telephone directories, we would become engaged with you. Everything you talk with us about is always so informative and so interesting. We're going to let you go because of time, but we're going to ask you to please come back again when you have another interesting topic to share with us. We love having you with us at the Merowitz Center. On behalf of everyone who's joined today and others who've joined previously, thank you for all the work you're doing, and thank you so, so much for making time to speak with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
And Happy New Year to all of you that are going to be celebrating next week. Thank you.